A few weeks ago, we put out a video highlighting some of our favourite demos from Steam Next Fest, and closed that list off with a rather vague mention of today's game, It Takes a War. It's one of those that's, as stated by YouTube Big Dogs NoClip and quoted on the game's very own Steam page, hard to talk about, at least not without revealing too much. My own analysis was therefore limited to thoroughly unquotable things, like rudely stating that the game looks like a pretty poor Counter-Strike clone. Oh. Well, there you go. I could only manage to talk about the game's demo for 40 seconds last time, but not content with the headache it previously gave me in terms of finding non-spoilerific things to say, we're back and looking at the full release. Let's see how we do this time. It Takes a War is a team-based shooter where communication is key, pitting players against one another in a relatively straightforward 6 versus 6 round-based team deathmatch. It's a throwback to the days where online first-person shooters were simpler. There are no bombs to defuse or hostages to save here, just two teams trying to take one another out. It's not really the sort of thing we usually review here at IndieLoupe, with first-person shooters not a genre we go in for, and further to that, something that appears to be online multiplayer only, being kinda outside of our wheelhouse. It's also arguably outside of the developer's wheelhouse. Mackinnon's previous title was The Subversive The Corridor, a short comedic title about, well, walking down a corridor, and one which frequently messed with its players. So it's a little bit odd for him to now be putting out what is clearly and apologies for the pun, straight-shooting FPS that has the sole focus of providing, to quote, pure combat with absolutely nothing under the surface to distract from visceral tactical action. So, weird change, yes, but plenty of other developers have proven that they can put out two games in drastically different genres and have them both be good, and I'll never criticise someone for not playing it safe. I liked his previous game, so I wanted to give this one a chance. So, visceral tactical action. Does it succeed? I'm going to actually start by talking about not the game itself, but its community. I don't know if my secret location in mainland Europe connects to the game's Glasgow servers, or whether the game is particularly popular in Scotland, perhaps on account of its creator being from there, but either way, in my first and only match, all 5 of the other players on my team were Scottish. I suppose only one of them was a solo queuer like me, and the other 4 were a group of friends, so it's not that unusual, but perhaps noteworthy. I say they were friends, and look, I know you're here for a review of a video game, rather than a review of a Scottish friendship group, but I could immediately sense some tension there. I know it's not necessarily fair on the game to focus on it too much, but it's my opinion that an online game is only as good as its community. After all, it's got a huge impact on how enjoyable it is to play, and something didn't sit quite right with me when it came to them. Before you attribute that to typical and blatant anti-Scottish sentiment coming from someone with this accent, I'll quickly play my "actually I'm Scottish" card and move on to some solid reasons for that. I know it's not the most professional thing in the world for me to put the audio here in my video, but literally the first thing one of them said upon hearing that there was a woman on the team was this:
"Another girl gamer."
Which, to be fair, his friends did immediately call him out on, but it did feel like me and my teenage buddies getting giddy about things a decade and a half ago, and the sort of embarrassing humour that you'd hope would have been left back in the early 2010s. Anyway, sorry, questionable first impressions of my teammates aside, let's actually get back to the game. It's not like you're gonna end up in a queue with these guys, right? I'm on record saying that here at IndieLoupe, we're only going to do negative reviews if games really deserve them. So I'm a little conflicted here. But if Mackinnon and publishers Pantaloon are going to take pride in us calling It Takes a War out on being a poor Counter-Strike clone, I'm afraid I'm going to have to double down on it. Between unfinished textures, out-of-place assets, I mean, what's a whiteboard doing in the middle of a Warzone courtyard, grenades in my inventory that I couldn't throw, that presumably nobody was able to throw based on the complete lack of them I saw in my match. There's a lot left to be desired. That's before we even consider my experience alternating between either getting dropped from out of nowhere and shots seemingly not connecting for either me or my enemies. Maybe it was lag or something from those potentially faraway servers I was on, but I can see the gunplay here growing frustrating very quickly. When the relatively benign chatter of your teammates...
What's everyone's favourite type of crisps?
What? Smoky bacon wheat crunchies.
...is more engaging than the actual gameplay, then perhaps there's a problem. And on problems, the bugs in this game are weird. Unlike anything I've encountered before. I listened to my teammates theorising that they were meant to be features, but eventually it gets to the point that everything just breaks. And as much fun as I'm having here, I think that's where I too might have to break. From the pretense, because hopefully obviously, but you never know, this isn't actually an online FPS. Mind blown. It Takes a War is incredibly good at feeling like it's what it's pretending it is. I promise that sentence makes sense, just think on it for a few seconds. It's a strange thing to compliment a game on, but the surface level shooter is the perfect level of mediocre, such that it's still relatively enjoyable for the brief amount of time you'll be playing it. It's not so bad as to be implausible, but you don't need to be a game critic or an idiot who makes video game reviews on YouTube to tell that it's more than a little rough around the edges. I don't know why I'm beating around the bush here when I had the perfect description for it back when its demo came out. It looks, and now I can confirm plays, like a pretty poor Counter-Strike clone, because that's exactly what it's trying to do. But obviously it's also doing quite a bit more than that. I mentioned Mackinnon's other game, The Corridor, a little while back, and It Takes a War borrows from that previous title in a lot of ways, taking mechanics that might be familiar if you played The Corridor, but twisting them to change their tone significantly. Where The Corridor is a mostly comedic experience, It Takes a War has a lot more bite to it. That's not to take away from The Corridor, which is a fantastic game in its own right, but in the context of It Takes a War, it feels almost like a warm-up, like a proof of concept for ideas that can be taken a lot further and be played with more ambitiously, which is what Mackinnon has done here. This is the point where I'd usually give examples of how exactly he's done that, but I think to do so would take away from your experience if you go and play the game yourself, which, yeah, you should. What I can say is that it goes disconcertingly meta in a way that I've not experienced since Daniel Mullins' Inscryption, and that there were more than a couple of moments that made me genuinely uncomfortable. There's a little bit more I can add, and it's mainly surrounding those arguably off-putting teammates of yours. It should hopefully come as no surprise now that they have a significant part to play in the way the game unfolds. This might be a relic of the past, you kids with your discords and all that, but anyone who's been privy to a voice chat where there's a group of people who clearly know one another, and you're not one of them, should be immediately familiar with the feeling you get in It Takes a War. Through both the writing and the voice acting, hell, even the quality of the mics and the way people are either talking over each other or with that slight delay, it's incredibly authentic, to the point that you almost forget the other players in the game are not. The pacing of the game's story, told primarily through the conversations between those characters, is exemplary. You're only there for less than an hour, but it builds up from listening in on them talking about crisps to something quite different. Even so, it's done in a way that feels as natural as it can, given the game's surreal nature. There's also a point being made here. I'm sure that the game's finale will resonate differently from player to player, but if you've ever had a relatively tight group of people you've played games with, there are themes addressed which you'll likely recognise from your own experiences, and, if you're anything like me, it should give you some pause for thought. I was obviously not foolish enough to enter It Takes a War thinking I was going to experience a real team-based tactical shooter, and yet I still got something entirely different to what I was expecting. For it to cover as many emotional bases as it does in such a short playtime, from humour to suspense to things that were, at least for me, pretty heavy, is quite the accomplishment, and one which I hope is rewarded with well-deserved recognition. My only worry is that people won't take that tiny bit of time needed to look under the surface and realise what this game actually is, without dismissing it as, well, you know. It Takes a War is a wonderful piece of storytelling, hidden within an unassuming setting. It is awarded 9 out of 10 by IndieLoupe.